Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here. I am indeed back from my vacation, and with that being said, there is most likely going to be a PTR build tomorrow. Now, I don't know what it actually is going to entail or things like that, but I do know that I've been wanting to get the video series out on Covenants, mainly being Venthyr, Necrolord, and Kyrian, because every Warlock, for the most part, plays Night Fae. But I've been wanting to do a series on those three Covenants, talking about their strengths, weaknesses, the Soulbinds, overall sims, their general placement in the raid, legendaries, and how they're good or bad for certain specs, because there are some specs of Venthyr, or even like Necrolord Warlock, for example, that actually aren't that bad, but they just don't hold up to Night Fae because, well, you know, it's Night Fae for a handful of reasons. Now, if you guys would like any weak ORS profiles or add-ons to see in this video, they're all indeed available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions anytime, feel free to do so. I also want to give a huge shout out to my patrons. Thank you a million times for support, guys. I really, truly do appreciate it. If you're interested in supporting on Patreon, there should be a link somewhere up here or in the video description somewhere. Now, this video is going to be based on the Necrolord Covenant, if you haven't figured it out by now. So, with that being said, let's get into it talking about the baseline ability, Decimating Bolt, and Fleshcraft. Alrighty, so jumping right into it, Decimating Bolt is the DPS ability, I guess the damage-based ability you get when you're playing a Necrolord Warlock. It's a 40-yard range on a 45-second cooldown. It hurls Bolt of Decimating Magic at your target, dealing X shadow damage and increasing the damage of your next 3 incinerates by 100%. On top of that, Decimating Bolt's damage and the bonus to incinerate both increase as your target's health decreases. So it sort of has like this pseudo execute clause attached to it. If you're playing Destruction, this is 3 incinerates. If you're playing Demonology, this actually applies to the next 3 Demon Bolts you cast. And if you're playing Affliction, it's a bit different. Affliction, it applies to either Drain Soul if talented or Shadow Bolt. But it only applies, for example, if we take Drain Soul here, which we're playing Nightfall for whatever reason on PTR. If we take Drain Soul here, it only applies to the next Drain Soul. There are not 3 Drain Souls, 2, there's only 1. If I swap the Nightfall, for example, it'll change to the next 3 Shadow Bolts here. So there's a lot of synergy between Decimating Bolt, Drain Soul, Execute Clause on Drain Soul, Malefic Wrath. We'll get to that in a little while in the Affliction section, but this was initially 3 stacks of Drain Soul as well in actual alpha and beta for Shadowlands. But they ended up nerfing it, making it 1 stack from 3, nerfing the damage modifier, nerfing the actual percent you get when you go lower in a target's like execute range. They nerfed it a tremendous amount. So while spoiler, I don't want to spoil the whole video here, but like Affliction is the main issue with playing Necrolord. Destro and Demo are in a better spot, but Affliction is just not very good when it comes to playing Necrolord. If you're looking for that, you know, universal applicability, is that a word? Night Fae is just the better option, hands down. It's not very close. Looking at the actual utility ability, that is Fleshcraft. Forms a shield of flesh and bone over 3 seconds that absorbs damage equal to 40% of your maximum health for 2 minutes. I have a shield for what, 30k? I guess 26k, 26,000 damage. Now it's on a 2-minute cooldown. This is very useful in raiding, Mythic Plus, PvP. Pop a Fleshcraft before the boss is pulled. You have a 30k shield on you. Pop up Fleshcraft before a large damage-based event is coming that you know about. Hey, a huge shield. Locke is already really tanky with Dark Pact and things. Dark Pact, Fleshcraft, Ending Resolve, you're not dying. You might actually live through a spike on Paint Smith at that point. It's very, very strong. In addition to that, when channeling it, your damage taken is reduced by 20%, and if you move near an enemy's corpse, it consumes essence and reduces the cooldown of it. Now, the cool thing with Fleshcraft outside of that is, depending on your Soulbind, I believe Plague Divisor actually has a couple little abilities, like, I believe here. Somewhere in here, when you're channeling Fleshcraft, you actually get random buffs depending what you end up absorbing as far as, like, the mobs and things go. It's really cool. So, Fleshcraft is your, like, overall utility ability. Not as good as Soul Shape. I think we've just all accepted the fact that Soul Shape is just the best, you know, utility-based ability out there for Covenants. And that's, well, honestly, pretty much life. Let's take a brief look at Necrolord Soulbinds. Okay, so getting into the Soulbind stuff here, spoilers ahead, Venthyr and Kyrian aren't really the best when it comes to Warlock stuff, Soulbinds and all that. But this is the Necrolord video. That's a video for a later time. Destruction Warlock, this is renowned 60 Blood Mallet Sims, casting Patchwork. I know, okay, I know the parameters aren't exactly what we want 100%. We want renowned 80 and Patchwork, but regardless, these still mostly do reflect the relevant and important, like, I guess, Soulbind Sims for Lock. They're pretty accurate. So, Destruction, actually ahead of Dreamweaver and Nia. Plague Divisor being very, very strong here, ahead by about 240 DPS, give or take. A pretty solid upgrade over Dreamweaver. As far as Affliction is concerned, Dreamweaver and Nia are indeed both ahead. Dreamweaver being about, what, 220-ish DPS ahead of Plague Divisor, but still, not a terrible showing for Necrolord here overall. Moving on, and finally, Demo, Dreamweaver, Plague Divisor, and Nia. So, what you can take away from this is that, honestly, Plague Divisor compared to Dreamweaver and Nia, and I'm forgetting Karain here. Necrolord and Necrolord and Nightfey Soulbinds, depending what you're looking at, if you're playing one Soulbind for multiple specs, they actually aren't that hard. There's not a huge difference there. Necrolord's ahead for destruction. Plague Divisor is very, very strong. And most of that is actually based around, well, it is mostly because of Kevin's Oozling. This is the final ability we got in 9.1. It's a 6% additional damage increase whenever this is actually proccing and dealing damage. Decimating Bolt summons Kevin's Oozling. So it's basically a 6% damage amp for 15 seconds, which, hey, you're also casting your Decimating Bolt. So you have your big damage amp in that window. It's a damage amp on top of damage amp. It just is really, really strong overall. Now, there's also other abilities like Volatile Solvent, Volatile. And to be fair, Bonesmith's not terrible either. He indeed got another DPS ability being Mnemonic Equipment. And he also has things like Carver's Eye. And I believe, yeah, War Stomper's not terrible either. So there are a few options here, but if you end up going into actual sims here for the most part, or I guess sims, parses as far as Necrolord's concerned, brace yourselves. There is a lot of Bonesmith here. Now, some of these do indeed show Kevin's Oozling, which is the Plague Divisor final ability here. If I said Bonesmith, I meant Plague Divisor, sorry. But some of them do, some of them don't. But basically, if you like Ultimate Form shown here, this is the same Soulbind. It just depends what you've chosen here. They don't have a great way of displaying Soulbinds on Warcraft logs, depending on how many you've actually taken. Regardless, though, a lot of Plague Divisor. We do indeed see a Bonesmith here, a Bonesmith here roughly, and a couple sprinkled in, give or take, but literally zero amenities until we get all the way on to Painsmith, seeing one here. And Lord have mercy, I don't know why you want to play a many here, but hey, you know what? I suppose it's something. So a huge wall of Kevin's Oozlings, Plague Divisor just getting a crazy amount of value this patch, which is interesting because in 9.0, it was basically Bonesmith. Bonesmith for Marrow Gemstones, and that was pretty much it. Everything else was just sort of mediocre. But then they gave us Kevin's Oozling, and it became much, much stronger. Ameni, unfortunately, is lacking a little bit. Still has Lead by Example, which is an intellect buff based around Decimating Bolt. A few other relevant abilities along the way, but for the most part, it's a big Plague Divisor show with a little bit of Bonesmith sprinkled in, depending how you look at it. So, like, honestly, compared to Nightfey, Necrolord Soulbinds on their own really aren't that bad. And one of the things here, you've seen a handful of Destro locks playing Necrolord putting good numbers. But the thing is, Nightfey is just better across the board. Because look how close Nightfey is here. It's better for Demo, better for Aff, and maybe a little worse for Destro. But overall, it's just still very, very strong as a whole. But I think one of the misconceptions with Necrolord is that the Soulbinds are bad. They're actually not. Plague Divisor is very, very good. And depending how things go in 9.15, if there's more tuning in Necrolord, it could be a serious contender with these relevant Soulbinds that it has. So I think it's definitely worth mentioning the Covenant-based legendary form Necrolord, and that is actually Shard of Annihilation, or Shard of Annihilation Leggings, however you want to word it. I don't know, it's a weird name for this thing, but either way. So the actual baseline ability says Decimating Bolt also increases their critical strike chance by 100% and critical strike damage by 50% for X ability. Now that can be Drain Soul, Shadow Bolt for Affliction, Demon Bolt for Demonology, and Incinerate for Destruction. So there's a bit of synergy here with every spec, and we'll get more into that in the actual spec section of the video here. But this legendary, I think, is actually a bit undervalued, and I think that's partially due to just Necrolord not really being played a crazy amount. This empowers Decimating Bolt a tremendous amount. So basically, it's saying that every single spell you cast, well, okay, every spell that's buffed by Decimating Bolt, depending on what spec you're playing, is going to have a large damage increase because you have the bonus to Drain Soul damage for your target being lower on health. It's also going to crit 100% of the time. It's going to crit for 1.5 times the damage. Now, let's say you pair this with Destruction in an Execute window, with a Havoc window, with Roaring Blaze. Big crit damage, guaranteed crits, big crit value with Roaring Blaze, damage amp. Let's say Aff with Malefic Wrath, the legendary. So you have Execute with Drain Soul, Decimating Bolt damage amp, and the Malefic Wrath stack of 105%. That's a huge damage amp. And the same goes for Demonology. You have a handful of abilities. Balespire's Burning Core, From the Shadows, Sack Souls, Inner Demons, Power Siphon. Abilities that you can pair with Shard of Annihilation, depending how you play it and stuff too. And technically, you know, the actual AF wouldn't be until you have 2 legendaries, all that kind of stuff. Regardless, there's abilities that this pairs with and works with very, very well. But the problem is, once again, Necrolord just not really played a whole lot right now because of how it's not as universally applicable as far as, you know, compared to Nightfey. Looking briefly at some of the parses in Sanctum. This is for telling here as well. Now, there is a much lower sample size for Necrolord Warlocks compared to Night Fae or other Warlocks in general, Night Fae is hands down, unsurprisingly, the most played Covenant in Sanctum for Warlocks, not even close. But one thing you'll notice here, these are overall Covenants right here. Going through, there's Demo, there's Destro, there's some AF sprinkled in. AF at 7 here, AF at 4 here at I, AF all over, or some on Remnant, AF all over Soul Render. And there's a bit here on Kel'Thuzad, which is actually pretty surprising too, because Kel'Thuzad was changed a million times. But if you go to actual Necrolord stuff, there's nothing. There's nothing. Not even on the good fights for AF, like Kel'Thuzad or Soul Render, where you just spam Seed. And that's partially due to the power of Decaying Soul Satchel for Night Fae, and partially due to just Decimating Bolt and Necrolord being utterly horrendous for Affliction. Now, the overall highest parses, comparatively, Terror Group being 20,000 DPS versus, you know, where are we at here? 20,000 versus, I guess, 28,000. But this Terror is meme, right? Highest Eye of the Jailer parse being 13.7 versus 10.7. The 9 being 11.5 and 10.6 versus 14.7 and 14.2. But once again, I want to emphasize here that this is not just these players are better or Night Fae is strictly better than this, because it's a much smaller sample size, right? You know, you've got a lot of power infusions mixed in here. You don't necessarily have as much mixed in when you're looking at more narrow, I guess, more narrow parses compared to, like, you know, looking at more narrow Necrolord parses compared to actual Night Fae ones. Remnant actually being 10.4 here overall, this actually being 13.4 playing Demonology compared to Destro on Remnant. So you can see how it also sways you towards playing different specs in different fights. Once again, a handful of Shard of Annihilation parses mixed in here, which is actually pretty cool to see. On Remnant, there's actually one there, one here. And if you sort by just overall destruction, like Necrolord Destruction Warlocks, there's actually a handful of Shard of Annihilation parses in here that are mixed in. It's pretty cool. Number 3 on Terragru, number 9 here, 1 or 2 mixed in. I really think this legendary is stronger than people think it is, and it's just not being played a whole lot because of Necrolord being so narrow for Warlock. But with that being said, let's get into all 3 specs, starting off with Destruction and talk about why it's so good, why it could be so bad, and what could be done to improve it. You've got good single target, you've got good 2 target with Decimating Bolt and Havoc Windows, potentially Shard of Annihilation if you're playing it. And if you're not, you can still play Cinders for triple conflag, higher Roaring Blaze uptime. Destro is sort of customizable when it comes to playing Necrolord, and both playstyles are actually pretty fun. Now, for the most part here, I'm just going to open up on this dummy. We're not going for like overall numbers here or anything. We're just sort of going into it, right? One of the cooler things is that, like, I can hit my bolt, my Dark will go into a Havoc window here. I'm going to cap for a sec, sure, but I get Roaring Blaze up, and watch how hard his Incinerates hit. The bolts for 21k, look at his Incinerates. They're hitting as hard as the Chaos bolts hit. You can get some insane Incinerate value when it comes to playing this spec, or I guess this Covenant more or less. And that's single target, that's 2 target. Technically it could be AoE, but unfortunately they ended up changing Fire and Brimstone over the course of beta. And as far as Destro's concerned, that's the one thing that I really wish they would change with Destro Lock as far as Necrolord is concerned. Early on in beta, Fire and Brimstone was probably one of our most impactful AoE spells. You could take this, and your Decimating Bolt every 45 seconds would now empower all your Incinerates in a 4, 5, 6+ target pull to hit much harder. But they deemed it too strong, so whenever you take Fire and Brimstone here playing Necrolord, let's do this. Cataclysm, look at my Decimating Bolt. Yeah, it still amplifies from 100% to... It goes from 100 to 200% if the target's basically at 0% health there for the actual Decimating Bolt damage amp. But if I take Fire and Brimstone, unfortunately, that changes to 40% here. This value is reduced while playing Fire and Brimstone. Now, I get early on that it might have seemed a little OP when it came to actual beta testing and things, but the fact of the matter is that there's been a lot of changes since then, and Destro Lock is not one of the classes competing as like one of the big top tier premier AoE classes of the game. Afflock will put Destro Lock to shame when it comes to AoE Mythic Plus, and honestly Demo with Implosion can probably do the same too, unless you're playing the 2-minute build with Wilfrids and things like that. So overall, Destro when single target, I'd say 2 target, is actually pretty solid for Necrolord. Good keybinds. You got Kevin, which I guess I think is despawn right there. I am indeed playing Plague Divisor. You got Kevin, a big damage amp that applies to your Decimating Bolt whenever you press it, whether you're playing Shard of Annihilation or Cinders. But the one thing is I wish they would change the actual Fire and Brimstone damage amp, because losing so much value, you don't really want to play it in Plus because you're losing so much value when it comes to single target, when F&B is not applicable. And when it comes to AoE, honestly, playing a build with like Reign of Chaos and things with Kata is just better in the first place, because Kata can apply all those immolates. It's sort of similar-ish Shard Gen, because you're not going to sit there on a 7 target pull and go immolate, 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 you're gonna start launching your incinerates for the extra charge in they bring, right? But when they don't hit very hard, and when Rain of Fire and Inferno were nerfed, and Rain of Chaos was nerfed and everything else, it puts the spec in a really awkward spot. Fire and Brimstone was that one thing that Destrolock, I guess one of the things Destrolock had when you were playing Necrolord that made it really, really cool. That's the one thing I'd say as far as Destrol's concerned, I'd like to see them do. Just go back and actually make it so that Fire and Brimstone gets the full damage amp from Decimating Bolt. So when it comes to Necrolord Demonology Warlocks, certain builds, certain Demon Bolt builds have indeed popped up in settings previously, like arenas and stuff like that. Looking at these huge Balespire's Burning Core based Demon Bolts to hit for 40k. Balespire's, for those who don't know, is the Demon Bolt legendary that I guess Demonology technically has access to, but doesn't really play because it's not very good. Unless you're playing a build like this, and to be fair, this build is still garbage. But there's a lot of synergy with this build. You got Power Siphon increasing Demon Bolt damage and giving you 2 charges of it, and these bolts deal more damage on their own. You have FTS increasing Shadow Flame damage, which Demon Bolt is Shadow Flame damage. Sack Souls, Demon Bolt. Inner Demons, more demons out. So you have 2 more imps, maybe another demon, depending what's going on. So more Sack Souls value. Balespire's Burning Core. You have Decimating Bolt, which is a flat increase in Demon Bolt's damage. But unfortunately, even with this build being as synergistic as it is, it's just, honestly, it's just nowhere near as good as Decon is. I don't know how to even open this build. I guess we just do this. The problem sort of lies in the fact that Decon's just so strong. I didn't mean to hit that. Decon's just so strong on its own. It makes things awkward in the first place. So we put our Tyrant out, cast our Bolt here, sure. And I guess launch these bolts. There's a 20k Demon Bolt, a 24k Demon Bolt right there. And this is where your big bolts are going to come from because you have all these pets out with your Tyrant being sent. You have Kevin out right here. There's a lot of value in this build single target wise. And burst wise, we're at like 8k right now, give or take. But the thing is, Decon will burst higher, and Decon being a minute cooldown is much more effective in probably the majority of PvE based settings. When it comes to arenas, we've seen this build played in certain settings with Veil Spiders, making certain things very, very strong, or giving Demolocks that decent-ish burst on certain classes that Destro can't necessarily bring unless you, like, you know, get 2 bolts off, which is impossible in arenas right now. When it comes to PvE, for the most part, knowing fights, knowing what's coming, being able to plan your cities ahead of time, it makes Decon that much stronger, that much more applicable, I guess you can say. And looking at the overall damage breakdown here, yeah, Bolt's a good portion of my damage for sure, but the overall damage is just still bad. Now, I'm not playing Veil Spiders here. I could be playing it. Bolt would be even stronger, but technically it'd be even worse if you were playing Shard Annihilation here anyways. So Bolt's a good portion of our damage, but the overall damage is still just so bad. Partially because of Decon being so strong, with stamina healing, everything that it has right now, and also partially just being because Demon Bolt's not a huge overall damage source for Demo. You can play a million effects that stack its power, but in the end, like, just playing more pets and playing Decon is the better alternative. It's just the best option for Demonology by 1.5 miles. This build has a very, very high skill ceiling. You want to be casting your Power Siphons during your FTS windows with your bolts, having as much pets out as possible, and getting Tyrant extensions, and launching them during Power Siphon procs or Power Siphon bolts. Like, there's a lot of actual, it's a super high skill ceiling with this build. But the problem is that the build's just not good in the first place. Now, I don't really know how Blizz would address this one. This is sort of like a weird situation to be in because a lot of the power just revolves around Decon. They could just straight up buff Sack Souls or make something multiplicative and not additive, because all these abilities are additive. Not one is multiplicative. But the problem is that if they do, they're probably going to buff like Sack Souls or FTS and make some of these multiplicative. That doesn't really help answer the issue with Decimating Bolt. It's still weird on its own for Demonology. So that's one way I guess they could address it, make it multiplicative. But in the long run, I just wouldn't be surprised. I'd like to see a buff Decimating Bolt, and I think Demonology, like overall damage amp wise, I think Demonology could probably stand a fair bit, because a build that's as synergistic as this build being so much worse compared to Decon is just not, it's disappointing. And this is one of the reasons why Necrolord is seen as like, Necrolord Demo is seen as fine. It's good in certain settings, but not good in all of them. Decon overall is just better. I guess adding to that last little bit of Demonology there, the best thing they could probably do is just buff Sack Souls by a bit or make it multiplicative. That would probably be the best way to sort of address Decimating Bolt's lack of, I guess, overall damage as far as Demo's concerned, while not directly buffing the actual ability. Because if they buff the ability, damage-wise. Also made changes to Destro and Aff based around what that spec needs. It probably would be too OP. The answer to Demonology to Demon Bolt build probably lies somewhere in buffing talents, being honest, and then using Bolt to empower that further. But regardless, moving on, Affliction. So this is actually the one spec that I enjoy playing in this Necrolord, but it's just not good. It's just bad. It reminds, so in Shadowlands Alpha and then Castle Nathria raid testing in Beta, Decimating Bolt used to actually empower 3 Drain Souls, but now it empowers 1. That change was made, I believe, like towards the end of Castle Nathria testing, because number 1, that rotation was so incredibly complex. If you literally missed 1 GCD or had 1 mechanic go on you, your damage was garbage. Your damage was in the toilet and kissed that pole goodbye. And like, I'm not kidding. I've never played a build that, I've never played a spec in my history of playing WoW that GCD intensive. If you missed 1 thing, if you got 1 mechanic on you, your damage is gone. Because you had to find time to channel 3 full Drain Souls on top of maintaining all your dots at low haste with Haunt, with PS, with Rapture windows, while also casting Decimating Bolt. It was so incredibly intense GCD-wise. But they changed that partially because the build was really, really good damage-wise too, by making Drain Soul the only ability that's buffed 1 time by Decimating Bolt instead of 3 times, like Incinerate. Like Shadow Bolt for Aff, if you're playing Nightfall, you get 3 buffs for that. Or if you're playing Incinerate, Shadow Bolt, and Demon Bolt, whatever I said. But regardless, there's a lot of synergies with Affliction similar to Demonology and Destruction with Decimating Bolt and Drain Soul. Number 1 being one of our, well, I guess our newish, conduit, Withering Bolt. This was nerfed significantly as well. It was like 80% when it came out. It was utterly insane. We had 100k Shadow Bolts. Either way, Drain Soul deals 10% increased damage per dot on your target. So now this only works, let's say for example you have 2 targets with 4 dots each in them. If you're hitting 1 target with Drain Soul, you only get the 4 dot damage amp, so 40%. Even though you have 8 dots active total, it's only on that target, so it sort of feels like Malefic Grasp-ish, but it's not. Either way, it has that going for it. So Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, Unstable Affliction, right? That's 4 dots. So that's a 40% damage amp outside of like PS Rapture windows, right? PS means 5 dots. So, well, 50% damage amp. So yeah, Withering Bolt. On top of that, you also have Malefic Wrath. Now, this, you had to maintain this legendary too during the beta, which is utterly insane. You had the Rapture every 8 seconds. Because this legendary's duration used to be 8 seconds, not 10. So yeah, that rotation was so incredibly complex, but also sort of fun at times. Either way, this effect here also empowers your Drain Soul. Now keep in mind, Drain Soul's damage is also increased in Execute on certain mobs. So you get a pretty high stacking effect damage-wise on Drain Soul with Decimating Bolt. Now, unfortunately, the 1 charge on Drain Soul from Empowerment here compared to 3 really hurt the spec overall damage-wise. Like I can open up here, for example. I do know this opener. Agony, Papa Ruby, Corruption, Siphon, PS, Dark Soul. I guess technically we would want to glare and then bolt. Yeah, I guess we would do that afterwards, actually. Either way, Rapture 3 times, 1, 2, 3. There's your damage amp, and cast your big drain. And look at the drain damage here. It's pretty relevant. It's a lot of damage. And you maintain your Malefic Wrath here, keep draining, and you go from there. And you have these weird like cycles basically every, I don't know, 30-ish seconds, give or take. You can pair your PS with your Soul Rot, and for the most part, you just maintain that big drain cycle every minute, every 45 seconds roughly, either way. Now, it's similar to how Night Fae is with like these Rapture windows, give or take, but the opener, you probably want to cast your Bolt, I can basically say, you want to cast your Decimating Bolt after your Dark Leather, I would assume, in place of like Soul Rot being before it. Either way, we have another Bolt window coming up here. Fresh a bit early, try and catch this, if it doesn't fall. There we go, cool, there's that. Fresh this. Probably cast this first. Agony. I'll probably need to Rapture once here, actually. There's that. And there's our big Drain. And Drain does, once again, a pretty good bit of damage. It's 21%. And we're at 7.5k here, give or take. But at the same time, Night Fae with Soul Rot, with the Rapture windows, will just do more damage overall. Now, if you're in pure Execute on target, for example, and you have this build, the big amps, with Necrolord, Decimating Bolt stuff, yeah, it might do more damage than Night Fae does, but Night Fae has, once again, that universal applicability on top of also bringing Decaying Soul Toucher with it, which is sort of why, like, it's just the overall choice. Plus, Soul Rot being a 6-dot, Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, UA, PS, and Soul Rot being number 6, also empowers Withering Bolt a little more, and just makes, you know, it just works with the spec. That 1 minute cooldown, whether you're playing DSS or not, you go through your 1 minute rapture windows with your Malefic Wrath and have that big damage amp from Malefic Wrath. It's just solid overall. This build's not bad, but the one thing I like to see, the damage is just lacking with this build when you compare it straight up with the Night Fae build, whether you're playing Dreamweaver or Nia. What I'd like to see is probably have Decimating Bolt return to 2 charge. Like, I'd go for 3 stacks, but I still think it would be a bit too GCD intensive. You'd probably want to have it returned, I guess, make it like 2 stacks instead of 3, for example, because that would still give a pretty significant boost to the overall damage of the build, but you wouldn't have to get all 3 Drain Souls off here. I mean, for the most part, we can actually do the opener here briefly and see how it looks. Like, let's see vaguely. We open up here like we used to. Haunt, UA, Agony, Corruption. Siphon, pop the Ruby now, sure, why not? PS, Dark Soul. Let's do this. So let's Rapture 3 times. Launch this. Drain. There's 1 full drain. Haunt. Rapture to refresh here. Drain again. Then during beta, you had the Rapture again to refresh, but it would fall already because it was 8 seconds and not 10. Your dots are falling, but you can see what I'm getting at. Having a 2 stack there instead of 1, I don't think it would be too hard to manage overall. It might be punishing in certain settings where you have to move a lot. Let's say like, phase 2 of Terra Grew, or like Guardian if you get Mechanic on you. But that's most specs in the first place, right? You have to deal with that. But that would be a pretty substantial damage boost. It would also make AF a very strong class in Execute. One of the most attractive things about this build, with having 3 stacks of Drain Soul, was that Affliction looked very, very good in Execute on fights. It was like one of the best classes in the game for it, if not. I think giving it 2 charges would be a very, very, very good middle ground for the actual spec. 3 might be a bit too high, hard to manage, legendary-wise, duration-wise, GCD-wise. 1 not being enough. I think 2 is the middle ground. We never even tested with 2. We just did 3 to 1. I think the best change, give it 2 stacks and go from there. See where it goes. Once again, if you're playing Nightfall, you still get 3 stacks of Shadow Bolt being empowered per bolt, but RNG is RNG. I'd like to play Necrolord AF with 2 stacks of Drain Soul, Decimating Bolt stuff. And honestly, AF is hands down the worst spec for Necrolord. Destro is arguably better than Night Fae, if not the same. Demonology could use a bit of help too. At the same time, you can just sort of like forego that build and just play Decon either way, and that would be okay. But AF has issues with Necrolord. It sort of seems like they were just like, it's too good during beta, don't know how to fix it, just nerf it into the ground and never touch it again. I say give it 2 charges. See how it goes. See where it goes. If they did, we have the Soulbinds. We sort of have the conduits. Let's give it a shot. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video gave you all a better insight into Necrolord Warlock stuff. The changes that could maybe be made to make the spec, I guess, Covenant a little better for Warlocks, and just, I guess, the current state of it as a whole. Now, like I said, the Demonology section, it's hard to say. The actual change that's needed probably lies somewhere in, honestly, as much as I hate saying it, nerfing Decon and looking at other dead talents for Demonology, which would then, in a sense, buff Decimating Bolt for Demo as a whole. The synergy is there. There's like 10 abilities that work together, but they're just all additive, none are multiplicative, and the build is hard to play and not rewarding because, hey, you can just hit poor pets, laugh, and catch your Tyrant and have him carry you to victory playing Decon because Decon is too strong. Either way, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. I'll be sure to get back to you. And let me know what you guys think about the video as well. I'm curious to get y'all's takes on these changes. I like the AF one the most. Destruction, Fire and Brimstone probably could be changed back. I don't think it really has... Destruction, even when we were playing FMB, this version of Night Fae Sow the Seeds with Decaying Soul Satchel is infinitely better than whatever that version of Necrolord Fire and Brimstone Destro was. You don't have Kata, you're lacking the Shard Gen, and taking Fire and Brimstone sort of makes you worse in single target, albeit so does playing Sow the Seeds, but, you know, your damage is that good, and AF can sort of be like tweaked and tuned to be better in single target than you think it is with STS, but Destro really can't. You're just sort of in a weird spot regardless. Now, that might make Cinder's played a bit more in +2, which is fine in itself, but I don't think the Fire and Brimstone nerf still needs to be there. Once again, let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. I'm curious to get y'all's takes on it. If you have any ideas or changes or anything, also, you know, thoughts, tweaks and tuning that can be made to these covenants, feel free to drop them down there as well. I'm definitely interested in it. I'll be sure to get back to you. Any weak ORS profiles or add-ons to here, you can grab for free off my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions anytime, feel free to do so. Also want to give a massive shout out to my patrons. Thank you a million times for all support, guys. I really, truly do appreciate it. If you're interested in supporting, there should be a link somewhere up here, as well as also in the video description. With that being said, I will be releasing Venthyr and Kyrian videos based around Warlock Covenant. It's probably in the coming days as well. I'm sort of waiting to see them drop a big PTR build tomorrow and, you know, sort of invalidate this video, but hey, we'll see where it goes. With all that being said, thanks again, dudes, and I'll catch y'all again soon on stream. Peace.